We're on number 5 in terms of the arguments for God's existence. This is the 5th argument for God's existence we're looking at. And to be honest, if I'm being transparent with you, this is my favorite argument for God, one of my favorites. And I got a text from someone today that said this is their least favorite argument. They think it's the weakest. So look, I mean, if you don't like it, it's okay. I still have 45 more arguments to go over, so you can just, if you don't like this one, yeah, I got others. Now, the structure of this most popular argument, it looks at like a feature of human experience that we all know, that if someone abuses another person, we don't take that to be a cultural convention or personal opinion. Like if somebody wore like really high like pink socks, like we would say that person is doing something that's awkward or against social convention, right? But we wouldn't say that's wrong or immoral or in fact wrong. But if someone's abusing a child or is being racist or cruel to a marginalized human being, we would recognize that as in fact evil or wrong. That's the experience we have, that there's a fact about it. It's not just an opinion. And so reality is such that there are things that are in fact right, and there are things that are in fact wrong, and there's things that are in fact good, and there's things that are in fact evil, and that the best explanation of these features of our experience, we intuit that there's evil and good, that what grounds that evil and goodness and what grounds right and wrong is a God. That's kind of how the moral argument works. It takes that feature of our experience and says, okay, and so the best explanation, or maybe some would say that good and evil, things being in fact right or wrong, that is best explained or serves as evidence for God's existence. So that's kind of basically the moral argument. And I actually have an outline in the back there. And so this is just the most popular version. I think William Lane Craig uses this version in his debates and his discussions. People know this version very well, but it says, premise 1, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. 3, conclusion, therefore God exists. And so what is objective moral, this talk of objective, I guess some people use that term, know what it means, but what does it mean? It means that it's independent of opinion. So for instance, if the Nazis won World War II and proceeded to take over like the whole globe, and everybody thought the Holocaust was terrific, the Nazis would be objectively wrong. Even though all of society would think that, okay, yeah, Nazis are great, whatever. No, they would be, in fact, wrong, just as wrong as somebody who said 1 + 1 = 3, right? It's just as wrong as that. And so in this case, ethics are not made up, but they're discovered or they're apprehended. You don't just make up ethics. They're actually things and truths that you discover. They're not just creations of like human conventions. They're truths, they're facts that are discovered. That's what it means to say that there's objective moral values and duties. Here's another way of putting the argument. There's multiple ways you can put this argument. 1, if God does not exist, then moral facts and moral duties do not exist. Moral facts and moral duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. You can also put it this way, about moral realism, which says there's moral facts, and we can know them. That's called moral realism. If God does not exist, then moral realism is false. Moral realism is true. Therefore, God exists. So those are kind of various ways you can put the argument in a sound way. And so when I say moral facts and moral duties, I mean something different. Those are different things. So it's good to be a doctor, right? That's a good thing. If someone wants to be a medical doctor, that's a pretty good thing. But no one would say, like, you're morally obligated to be a doctor. Like, you have to be a doctor. It's something you're obligated to do. But it's good to be a doctor. It's good to be a veterinarian. It's good to be a construction worker, ... right? But you're not obligated to become a construction worker. You could do something else, right? So it's good to be a doctor. It's good to be a pastor. It's good to be a construction worker. It's good to be a veterinarian, and so on. But you don't have a moral obligation to be those things. You can just pick one. And so they're good, but you don't have a right or wrong thing there. And so good and evil, and then there's right and wrong, and something can be good, and you need not have a moral obligation to pick a certain vocation. So that's kind of the difference between moral duty. You should do something, and good and evil. It's good to be a doctor, but you don't have a moral duty to be a doctor. So that's one thing. Now, I want to clear up a misunderstanding about this argument. This is not saying that Christians or people that believe in God are better people, they're good, and then atheists and agnostics, oh, they're nasty, awful, evil people. This is not saying that. People have misconstrued this argument to be saying that. It's not even addressing that. You could even think that atheists and Christians are equally good, or you could even think that atheists are better than Christians. I don't know, whatever you want to think, it's fine. But what this is saying is that whatever you think is better, it's saying on the worldview of God existing, on the Christian worldview, on theism in particular, philosophically speaking, they can better account for the meta-ethical fact, for moral facts. That theism or God's existence can explain that, whereas atheism cannot. Whether or not atheists or theists are better people, this is not addressing that. This isn't also addressing that theists have better moral motivation. There's arguments that say that, by the way, that Christians have better moral motivation. But this is not that argument. This is an argument saying there is these objective moral truths, moral facts, and theism best explains these. Or in some cases, this is a logical argument that's saying that theism is the grounding of these moral facts. So that's basically the argument there. People can get confused about it. Now, there are people, if you peruse on YouTube, for instance, there are popular YouTube internet agnostics like Joe Schmidt who say that this is a terrible argument, this is not good, that there's no reason to think there's any connection between there being moral facts and God's existence, like there's no relationship. You can deny God's existence and still believe in moral facts. However, it's kind of gaslighting here because atheists themselves, the history of atheism has said, if you deny the existence of God, then there's no reason to believe in objective morality. Atheists have been saying that for hundreds and hundreds of years. And when I was an agnostic, I said that. And I thought that if there's no God, there's no objective moral truths. Most of the common atheists and agnostics I talk to and run into would say that if there's no God, there's no objective morality. This is something that so the first premise, if God does not exist and objective moral values and duties do not exist, many atheists agree with this. And not only that, but prominent atheists agree with this. Richard Dawkins, who wrote the book, The God Delusion, so you know where he stands on that. He says that the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no God, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Dawkins concedes it is pretty hard to defend absolute morals on grounds other than religious ones. So he says that. Paul Kirk's a humanist and atheist, says the central question about moral and ethical principles concerns their ontological foundations. If they are neither derived from God nor anchored in some transcendent ground, they are purely ephemeral. They're not out there. They don't exist objectively. Michael Roos, who's a philosopher of science, well known, he writes, the position of the modern evolutionist is that humans have awareness of morality because of such awareness of biological worth. Morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands, feet, and teeth, considered as a rational, justifiable set of claims about an objective something. Ethics is, his words, illusory. I appreciate it when someone says, love thy neighbor as thyself. They think they are referring to something above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory, is an illusion. There's no objectivity. And of course, the central figure of existentialism, I read him in community college, let's go in there, was Jean-Paul Sartre. He says, the existentialist finds it extremely embarrassing that God does not exist. Well, I'm glad he finds it embarrassing. That's interesting. For there disappears with him all the possibility of finding values in an intelligible heaven. So Jean-Paul Sartre says, there's no God, there's no values. This is from Friedrich Nietzsche, who, of course, is an atheist, well-known atheist. Many people know him as the atheist, right? And nihilism is the denial of any values and meaning and worth and on any level. So he obviously denies the existence of moral facts. This is what he says. There are altogether no moral facts. They always contain mere absurdity. And so, yeah, be a nihilist. There's no value, ultimate worth, and meaning to reality. as the Metallica song says, nothing else matters, right? There's no point to it. So that's what Nietzsche landed in here. So you can tell, I think, that if there's no God, there's no moral values. You can tell these atheists think that. You run into many people, they will just assert this. They will say this. This is kind of, I would say, the man on the street kind of view. That if there's no God, there's no values. Objectively, there's no moral facts. But why is this? And what about atheism in particular, the belief that there's no God? What is it about that view that makes it so hard to have these moral facts? And a lot of people will state this, but I want to get into the kind of brass tacks here as to why, in particular, atheism is not compatible with moral facts. So first off is that objective moral facts, they're not physical. I can't throw murder is wrong across the room. I can't bake it in an oven. I can't heat it up in a microwave, right? So it's immaterial. And on atheism, plausibly, everything is physical. Everything is material. It's, atoms hitting atoms, marbles hitting marbles. That's, matter and motion, essentially. Biological stuff and physical stuff you can throw across rooms and whatever. There are no non-physical truths on atheism. Plausibly, everything's a physical object. Everything can be reduced down to physical stuff. And so just on the start there, you have that kind of initial rub, okay? But as we look at this more and more about the nature of moral facts, it becomes increasingly implausible on atheism. So certain moral facts, especially like we can, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Those are pretty unchanging, clear moral facts. Those are unchanging. But if you look around the physical world, the one thing we know is that everything around us is changing. Everything physical is changing, right? Stock market goes up and down. Rocks goes up, streams goes downstreams. We had a crazy winter here in Utah. Things are always changing. I mean, everything is always in flux and changing. And human beings are changing. Their opinions and emotions, if I eat the wrong thing, I'm not going to wake up happy in the morning, right? So human beings are changing. Rocks and trees and bees are changing. The universe, and as we know it here, is in flux. But see, moral facts, they have this sort of unchanging character about them. So we got two things already that's already looking pretty incompatible here with atheism. Third, moral facts are necessary. That is to say, like, it's wrong to abuse children. It's evil to abuse children. That seems like a necessary truth. That couldn't be wrong. That couldn't be like, well, in one world it's totally great, in another it's bad. No, it seems like that the fact that it's wrong to abuse people, abuse children, for instance, that's a necessary thing that couldn't change. That's a fixed sort of thing. That is the way that it is. And it's not going to turn out that it's great to murder people, for instance. Like, that's a necessary truth. Okay. In case you were confused about it. So this is similar to like a mathematical truth. 1 + 1 = 2. Couldn't be 3. So moral truths have that sort of necessary feature. Now the physical universe, as we see it, could have existed, could not have existed. The Big Bang could have happened. It could have not happened. We could be here. We could not be here. In fact, odds are we wouldn't have been here at all. If just things would have happened by blind chance. So yeah, we could not be here. The physical world could not be here. But moral facts have this necessary feature. And so because they're necessary and the universe is not necessary, it can't be based on the universe. And so, yeah, you look at these three features I just pointed out right here, becomes pretty clear, becomes pretty obvious to all of us that these moral facts, they're not meshing great with atheism. So what do atheists do at this point? Well, a route they take is Platonism, atheistic moral realism, or Platonism it's called. The idea that essentially you have these things, and I tried to explain this once to a Sunday school group of kids, and they couldn't even understand it, or they were looking at me like I was on something. They're like, what are you on? But atheistic moral realism, or Platonism, is that there is outside of space and time these immaterial things, goodness, badness, justice, rightness, wrongness. They're outside of space goodness, badness, and those kind of things. They're outside of space and time, okay? And so, yeah, I have to confess, I don't even know what that even means, to say that something is just this impersonal thing It's this impersonal, immaterial thing that's necessary outside of space and time that's just justice. But of course, justice isn't just. It's just this thing that says it's just. I don't even know. I mean, usually when I say like, that guy is a just person, or that's a good man, we usually attribute that to persons. We don't attribute that to like chairs, rocks, and trees, and bees and such. But yet we're calling these immaterial, necessary things outside of space and time called goodness and justice. We're calling that goodness and it just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't even know what that means. So I'm going to be honest with you. The best analogy I can give for this is kind of Star Wars. Okay, Star Wars, you have the Force, right? The Force is impersonal. And so you have the light side and the dark side of the Force. Okay? Now, the Force is not a person. I mean, so that's kind of like, it's kind of like atheism on Star Wars, I guess. That's what platonism's like. There's a light side and the good side kind of thing going on here. And so you're not obligated to follow one or the other, but you just pick one if you want to be a Sith or a Jedi kind of thing. And so that the Force is not a person, it's impersonal, but there's a light side and a dark side. And so that's kind of like atheistic moral realism a little bit, except it's outside of space and time, which makes it even weirder. So there's that. So here are the problems with atheistic Platonism or moral realism, or we'll call it Star Wars atheism for short, if make it easier to understand. But the first problem is that moral truths and moral facts have information, and information requires a rational mind. It requires an informer, I think, which would involve a rational, necessary mind. So, for instance, moral facts is murder is evil, justice is good, it is evil to discriminate against others based on their race or gender, things like this, right? That's information. I think we would all say that is info right there. That is information. And so where does the information come from? Well, information comes from an intellect, comes from a rational being of sorts. And so that all of this is information. It must come from an informer, a rational mind. And so to say that it comes from an impersonal thing, that's why we just can't make sense of atheistic moral Platonism. That's why when we say it, no one knows what we're talking about. To say there's something outside of space and time that, is justice, goodness, and so on. Murder is wrong, bad. I mean, I don't even know what that means. It's just so bizarre. So another thing is that abstract objects outside of space and time can't explain moral obligation. So I'm morally obligated to provide for my family, for instance. I'm morally obligated to be loving to my neighbor. I'm obligated to persons. But an impersonal thing, like I'm not obligated to if a bomb came and died, I was the last person on earth. I have no obligation to take care of these chairs in here anymore. I've always seen like a Twilight Zone episode where the guy's left all by himself at the end of the world. Like, he has no obligation to physical objects. We have obligations to persons. The only reason why I'm supposed to maintain these chairs in here is because people are going to sit on them on Sunday. Or today would be good too. But that's the only reason why I have any obligation to chairs, is because I have obligations to other persons. But it doesn't make sense to be obligated to an impersonal thing, and these abstract objects are impersonal, and they would have no force over us. I mean, if there's an abstract thing that's outside of space and time that says murder is wrong, I'm like, I don't care what that thing says outside of space and time. I don't care what that, there's no sort of obligation upon me. And this is a big problem really with this atheistic moral realism, is that abstract objects like numbers or, justice or goodness, they don't cause anything. They don't create anything. They're impersonal, just abstract things outside of space and time. They don't cause me down here, kind of boots on the ground kind of thing. They don't do anything. And so, I can't know what's right or wrong or good or true, because I'm like developing here as an animal on this planet here, and I have no idea if I have any connection to this outside realm of truth, goodness, and beauty, and justice. They can't cause anything. So I don't know what goodness, truth, beauty, and justice is, because it can't cause me any more than the number 1 or 2 can cause me. So how am I to know what goodness is? Well, goodness can't cause me. What's causing me on atheism is I'm an animal on a rock, and I'm being guided by the evolutionary process. I have no way of knowing that these things are causing me. They're not, I mean, the fact that my brain would even adapt to know about these things outside of space and time, I would have no chance or clue of knowing what they are. And so it would be a miracle if I knew what they were. They don't cause me, and I don't even know if the evolutionary process on atheism would let me have access to them. So they have no causal power. They can't give me moral knowledge. And so because of that, moral realism ends up falling apart on this atheistic moral realism. So not a very plausible view, but that's all they got, So, that's kind of one of the best explanations they have. One of the things they do is a pushback called the Euthyphro dilemma, and this is in Plato's dialogues that he brings up. This is brought up by many popular atheists. But the Euthyphro dilemma tries to show that God can't ground moral facts because of these problems, this dilemma. And so the idea is, well, if what God commands is right, then God could command that murder is terrific and wonderful. And if God can command, if morality is based on God's commands, then God can command crazy stuff. That's the idea. God could command that abuse and burning down buildings is wonderful. You should just burn down houses. God could command anything. God could command that people can murder each other, can lie to each other, ... right? So that's kind of like, if morality is based on God's commands, then God could command anything he wants, and that could be crazy, and so morality is plausibly not based on God's command. So they would say, well, maybe God commands what's good. God just automatically commands what is the best thing, what is good. And if that's true, then goodness is independent of God, and you don't need God anymore. That's kind of the dilemma. The problem is it's a false dilemma, because a Christian, an atheist, someone who believes in God, would simply just say that goodness is God himself. That goodness is God. God is the greatest. He is a maximally excellent being. He is good, and goodness is based on God's necessary nature. And so when God commands things, for instance, God could never command that murder is terrific. God could never command that people should loot and steal and so on. And so This Euthyphro dilemma is really just not a plausible kind of dilemma. In fact, it's a false dilemma. So the last refuge you really got here, and I'm going to have 2 more points, and I'm going to close this one up here. How are we doing on time? Not great, but we'll get through it. So time-wise, though, the last refuge they got is what I call biting the bullet, and that is to say, yeah, there are no moral facts. There are no moral duties. They don't deny the first premise, so they'll deny the second premise, that there are no moral facts. They're just made up by culture and society. That's kind of their last refuge. The problem with this is that murdering people for fun seems objectively wrong. I mean, that seems like just obviously wrong. Someone who denies that the Holocaust was evil is just as wrong as a person who denies that 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, it seems in our moral experience that we have ethical intuitions that there are just certain things that are in fact right, and there are certain things that are in fact totally wrong. And it becomes difficult to deny the objectivity of ethics, because any argument you can mount to deny your ethical intuitions and beliefs, you can also give against the objectivity of your perceptual beliefs. How do you know you're not a brain in a vat or hooked up in the Matrix? Or there's different scientific theories and different ways scientists disagree about each other or with each other. So how do you know that if there's disagreement in science, how do you know that science is anything objective at all? Maybe there's no objectivity in science because people disagree on certain scientific theories and quantum mechanics and in physics. And so, yeah, you can say, well, we can be wrong about moral judgments, but you can also be wrong about these scientific theories, and that seems like absurd. It seems like certain scientific theories are well established. It seems like I'm not in the Matrix, thankfully, or I'm a brain in a vat being stimulated by mad scientists. So, any argument a person can say that these moral intuitions that we experience and intuit that it's wrong to murder, the same argument you can give against that, you can give against our perceptions being non-objective, like I'm not really perceiving a chair right here. or that there are, because there's different views, there's different theories in evolution, there's different theories on cosmology. Because there's different scientific theories, there's no objectivity in science because people disagree. All the arguments you can standardly give against that, you can give against morality. And so you should be a universal skeptic at that point. But it seems like skepticism like that's sort of silly and not commonsensical and kind of absurd. And so it seems like, yeah, you have good reason to believe in moral facts. One of the things people have pointed out about this is really interesting, is that any skeptical argument you give against there being moral facts, any at all, the fact that there's moral facts is going to be more obvious than the argument you're giving against it. That's the idea. I like the way atheist Louis Anthony puts it. She says, any argument for moral skepticism, the idea that you should doubt, that we have these moral intuitions and these moral facts, any argument for moral skepticism will be based on premises which are less obvious than the existence of objective moral values and duties themselves. So if I give an argument against, people disagree about morals. That's very common. People say that all the time. Or there's tribes people that are cannibals. People will say this kind of stuff. Any argument that you give against the objectivity of moral values, that argument is less obvious than the fact that it's wrong to murder people, objectively. So that's kind of the problem, and that's actually the nerve of all skeptical arguments, is that any skeptical argument a person gives, common sense is more obvious than the skeptical argument they're giving. That's why skepticism's not really taking off anymore, because of that basic little factoid. Now, another thing is, and this is interesting as well, is that if you deny moral facts, then you take away something precious from the atheist that he doesn't even realize he's losing. Something so precious, kind of like Golem level precious here, my precious kind of thing. So one of the precious things you take, atheists love to say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. I believe in reason. The reason why I hold this ultra unpopular view of atheism is because, I just follow the truth. I want to follow the truth and the evidence and the science and the science. And the science, that's all I want to do. I'm just so truthful and honest. That's why I deny your sky daddy kind of thing. That's kind of their line. The problem is, are they saying you should it's objectively good to pursue truth? Are they saying that it's a moral fact that you should, in fact, pursue knowledge and truth and science and follow the science? Should you pursue science? You see should, underline should there. That's a moral claim. You should be intellectually honest. You should follow the evidence where it leads. Oh, those are moral claims. Are they just made up, like fairy tale story made up, or are they real moral claims on a person's life? Should you follow the evidence? Should you follow the truth? The only way you can do that is if you believe in objective morality. Otherwise, it's like, well, I don't need to follow the truth. There's no reason to, it's just something society made it up, so we can just not follow the truth and just kind of do our own thing. So, so they end up losing their obligation to follow the reason, follow the science, follow the truth, because there's no shoulds, there's no oughts. You see that? So that's what happens if you give up morality, is you can't make sense of the argument. So it's funny, atheists will be arguing against the existence of God, saying there is no God, and saying we want to follow the truth and we should follow the science, and it shows there's no God. All the while they're using that reasoning, which assumes God. Follow the truth, follow the science. You should act, intellectually honest. You should analyze. You shouldn't misrepresent arguments. You shouldn't use logical fallacies. All of those are moral oughts, and so that assumes moral objectivity. That assumes there's moral facts. And so in arguing against God and saying we should follow the truth, they're actually assuming God's existence, which I find, by the way, highly ironic. So what does the moral argument give you? Okay, 5 more minutes, we're good? Okay. What the moral argument gives you is something really quite fantastic. And this is actually the most provocative thing I'm going to say. You get from the moral argument an ultimate standard of goodness. You get this good, rational, necessary being who is the ultimate foundation of right and wrong, an ultimate standard of goodness, which seems to match pretty well with the God of the Bible, is that you have this ultimate standard of goodness and greatness itself, which is kind of like the standard meter is a meter high. It's a standard of goodness. It is ultimate goodness that grounds goodness, grounds morality. That's what the moral argument gives you, because that is the best explanation of morality. Now, this actually fits best with the Christian God in particular, because the Christian God is the highest expression of love. Obviously, if something is the ultimate standard, the highest goodness, it grounds all right and wrong and everything, it is the highest goodness, it should have the highest expression of love, because goodness and love are interchangeable. I mean, they're really, well, I should say they're interconnected is a better way of putting it. It would seem plausible that the highest good, which is God, would have the highest expression of love. And the highest expression of love is what we would call self-giving love. A love that gives itself for the sake of the other. Self-giving, self-sacrificial love. If I'm just sitting around like loving myself, thinking about how great I am, that's like self-focused love. But if I'm thinking about other people and focused on others in love and being self-sacrificial and self-giving, well, that's a higher expression of love and goodness, is it not? I mean, it's very clear to us. Now, the problem is if you don't have multiple persons in God, you don't get that, because to have self-giving love for another, you need multiple persons. You need to have one person and another person, self-giving, self-sacrificial love. And of course, you get that in the doctrine of the Trinity. You get multiple persons. And so to get this highest expression of goodness itself and this highest ethical good standard here, you need to have a multiplicity of persons to have this self-giving love, which is intrinsic and inherent to the Christian God. So this can actually get you quite a bit. It gets you, this moral argument gets you a picture of God that best matches with traditional Christianity, or biblical Christianity, I should say. So the moral argument's a pretty good argument, I would say, getting you all these sort of things that leads you to Christianity. I guess people could say, well, the God of the Old Testament's really bad and mean, and he's just, so, he kills people, and he tells people to kill other people. That's what people say. And so actually this moral argument doesn't match with maximal goodness, the standard of goodness. Well, the problem is goodness includes justice, does it not? It does include justice. And last time I checked, myself included, we sin every single 5 minutes. And so if God is just, I mean, he could take me at any moment. I could die in a car accident. I could die at any moment. God has that right as a just being to take my life, and in every second of my life is a gift, and God can take away that gift, and he's just in doing so. So I don't think there's anything wrong with those Old Testament stories in particular. I think, like, if you hold that God's not just loving, but he's also just, easily explained there. And so I do think the moral argument is an argument for God's existence, and also in particular an argument for the triune God. Well, I think there's other arguments for the Trinity, but at least multiple persons, which I think matches best with the Christian story and narrative. So I don't know, do we have time for questions, or should we just, we're good? We have time for questions. Oh, if anybody wants to come up and ask a question on the big M here, you can do that. One taker. All right.
Is this working? Okay, cool.
Pretty good, yeah.
So I was just curious, like, what if someone makes the argument, like, why does it have to be God that is kind of the proponent for, like, moral values? Could you try to argue around that? I mean, at that point, it seems kind of like you're just trying to make excuses, but, I mean, generally, what would be your response to a person that just, like, wants to deny God and, say, like, oh, couldn't it be just, like, maybe they're trying to, kind of poke at it by saying, like, oh, well, it could be just, like, Xenu, but he has all the same aspects of God, and he's, does the same things, but he's just a different name. And I don't know what you said, something like that.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So in the first place, like, it would have to be a immaterial, necessary being. So it couldn't be like Zeus or like the pantheon of the Greek gods. So, it can't be like the flying spaghetti monster, kind of Richard Dawkins there. But it has to be a being that's immaterial and necessary, because all necessary things are material, not physical. And to ground morality would have to be non-physical as well. That's another thing. And then I give another argument for being multiple persons. And so when you're looking at a non-physical necessary being, there's only 3 live religions that hold to that, and that's Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And I just got a way to narrow it down just to Christianity. So there you go, right there. That's how I do that.
Cool.
this out in prayer, and thank you all for coming and for listening to this, what I consider to be a pretty powerful argument. God, we are thankful for the time that we've had to reflect on this, and may your truth reign in our lives, and may we try to follow you even though we fail and stumble every day. For you have died on the cross for all of our moral transgressions and forgiven us of all of our sins by trusting in you. May you be glorified, Jesus, now and forevermore. It's in Christ's name we pray.